My mother-in-law stood up in a restaurant full of 30 people, slammed a sealed envelope onto the white tablecloth and smiled. Not a polite smile. Not a nervous smile. The kind of smile a person wears when they have spent years rehearsing one single moment and they are finally here. She said, "Daniel deserves to know the truth." Inside that envelope was a DNA test. A $3,500 unauthorized DNA test that she had secretly arranged. A test that proved my 8-year-old daughter Sophie was not biologically Daniel's child. Every person at that table turned toward me. Business associates. Cousins. Friends who had driven hours and flown in from other states for what Margaret had described as a family celebration. 30 pairs of eyes, all expecting the same thing. Tears. Collapse. A confession. A marriage ending in real time over the remains of the appetizer course. What nobody in that restaurant knew was that my husband and I had been carrying a secret for 8 years. A secret we had chosen to carry together. A secret that had nothing to do with betrayal and everything to do with survival. And what Margaret did not know, standing there with that particular smile, was that Daniel was not reaching for the envelope. He was reaching under his chair for a document bag. If you are the woman who holds her family together year after year and gets treated like the threat instead of the foundation, stay with me. Because this story ends exactly the way it should. Let me tell you who Margaret Carter is, so you fully understand what 25 years inside her orbit feels like. At 59, Margaret was not some confused grandmother acting out of misplaced love. She was sharp, precisely groomed, and relentlessly deliberate. She chaired 2 charitable committees. She wore structured blazers to school pickups and arrived at casual dinners with restaurant-grade hostess gifts she carried in coordinated tote bags. She was the kind of woman who made everything look effortless specifically so that nobody would examine how much effort she was actually putting into controlling everything around her. She had disliked me from the first dinner Daniel brought me home to meet her. By our engagement she had graduated to something I can only describe as a sustained, methodical campaign. When Daniel and I got engaged, Margaret pulled him aside and told him I was marrying him for financial security. Daniel told me this himself, at the time with a slight laugh, as though it was too absurd to discuss. I did not laugh. I stored it. When I had a miscarriage at 34, one of the most privately devastating periods of my life, Margaret told Daniel's aunt that I had probably caused it through the stress of overworking. His aunt told me this directly, the way people do when they want you to know without wanting to be held responsible for the telling. Margaret never once acknowledged it to my face. She planted the seed quietly in the ears of family members, and then showed up to Sunday dinners with her usual warmth. The moment I remember most clearly happened the night of Daniel's 40th birthday. I had spent 3 weeks planning that party. 60 people. A backyard that looked exactly the way I had imagined it. Margaret arrived 40 minutes before the guests, let herself in through the back gate, walked into my kitchen and rearranged the entire food table because she said it looked cluttered. Then she stood at the party accepting compliments about the setup from people who had no idea what she had done. I watched her accept those compliments and I understood something I would not fully name for another 20 years. Margaret did not want to destroy me loudly. She wanted to erase me quietly. But there was something underneath all of it. Something that only became specific and focused when Daniel's consulting firm started doing very well. When the firm crossed $350,000 in annual revenue and kept climbing, when the mortgage on our home was paid off, when our retirement accounts crossed 7 figures, that is when Margaret's interest in our finances changed. She started mentioning Daniel's sister Rachel in conversations where Rachel had never come up before. She made small references to estate planning, to what Daniel intended to do, eventually, to keeping things in the family. Rachel was 44 and had made several poor financial decisions in her adult life. She was being positioned. Our combined assets at that point included the home at $850,000, retirement accounts worth $1.2 million, Daniel's business valued at $2.5 million, and savings of $180,000. Approximately $4.7 million in total. Margaret and Rachel wanted that money to pass in a direction that excluded me entirely. They had been working toward that goal for years. Here is what I want you to understand about people like Margaret. She did not see what she was doing as theft. She saw it as correction. In her version of events, I had stolen something: her son, his future, his money, his loyalty, by marrying him and building a life he had chosen freely. She had decided somewhere along the way that the solution to not being chosen was to make the choice on his behalf. To manufacture the conditions under which Daniel would have no option but to come back to her. The DNA test was not about truth. It was about control. It was the final attempt of a woman who had been trying to undo a decision for 25 years and had finally found what she believed was the key. But neither she nor Rachel knew what we had been quietly building in the background. And they would not find out until we chose to show them, in front of 30 people Margaret had personally invited. I want to stay in the years before the restaurant for a moment, because when people hear stories like this, they imagine the cruelty was obvious, dramatic, the kind of thing that makes the choice to act feel clear. It was not like that. It was 1,000 small things across a long time. It was Margaret volunteering to babysit Sophie, and then spending the entire visit telling my 4-year-old that her mother worked too much and that children needed a parent who was present. Sophie repeated this to me directly, the way 4-year-olds do, without understanding what she was delivering. I held my face still. I thanked Sophie for sharing. And I put it in the same place I put everything else Margaret handed me. It was Margaret calling Daniel's cell phone at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, when we were putting Sophie to bed, to tell him something that could have waited until morning. She did this 2 or 3 times a month. Every time. The timing was not accidental. It was her way of inserting herself into the quiet parts of our life, the parts that belonged only to us, and reminding Daniel that his primary obligation in her view ran to her. It was the Christmas when I had spent 4 days preparing dinner for 18 people, had the table set and the food timed, and Margaret arrived and asked loudly enough for 3 people to hear whether I had remembered to rest the roast. I had been cooking professionally for 3 years before I met Daniel. She knew this. The question was not a question. It was a measurement. A reminder that no matter how long I stood at this family's table, she still held the ruler. These things accumulate the way sediment does, invisibly and constantly, until one day you realize you are buried under them and the person who put them there is still adding more and smiling while they do it. But here is what Margaret never understood about patience. She thought my silence meant I was managing. She thought I was absorbing because I had no other option. She thought the woman who kept quiet year after year was the woman she could count on to keep quiet forever. She was wrong about all of it. The woman who absorbs for 25 years is not a woman who has no power. She is a woman who is waiting to use it at exactly the right moment. And our moment was coming faster than Margaret knew. What she did not know, what she could not have known because she had never once thought to ask, was that I had been keeping records too. Not of the big things. The big things were obvious and she knew I had them. I had been keeping records of the small things. The specific things. The things said in front of witnesses at dinner tables and family gatherings and school pickups across 25 years. Everything she had ever handed me I had filed. And the filing was almost complete. The obsession with Sophie started when Sophie was 2 years old. We had tried to conceive for years. 2 rounds of IVF that did not result in pregnancy. Long quiet evenings where Daniel and I talked about what our life might look like without children. Then at 38 I became pregnant naturally. Margaret found this suspicious. She told Daniel, in the careful way she deployed her most poisonous ideas, that women with documented fertility problems did not simply conceive at 38 without medical assistance. She framed it as concern. She started making observations about Sophie's appearance. Her lighter coloring. Her features. Her eyes. Sophie did not look like a Carter, Margaret said. She said it in different ways to different people across different years. Every time Daniel shut it down, firmly, clearly, Margaret moved the behavior underground. But this is where Rachel's role needs to be understood fully. Because what happened at that restaurant was not a one-woman operation. Rachel had been working in parallel for years. At a family barbecue when Sophie was 4, she said in front of 6 relatives, "Sophie is so uniquely beautiful. Where did those eyes come from?" Said with a smile. Said lightly. Said in a tone that put the question in the room and let it stay there. This was not curiosity. This was architecture. Rachel was not a passive participant who got swept up in her mother's obsession. She was a co-architect. She needed the same outcome Margaret needed. She needed the divorce, Emily out of the picture, Daniel's estate flowing toward her. And then Rachel stopped being a woman who just talked, and became a woman who acted. I found out what she had done only afterward from Sophie herself, the way you find out the most devastating things. Casually from someone who doesn't understand the significance of what they're telling you. Sophie mentioned it on the drive home from the sleepover Margaret had arranged 6 weeks before the dinner. "Aunt Rachel was there," she said, looking out the window. "She did my hair. She used my special brush and then she put it in a little bag." She paused. She said it was so she could remember my hair color. I kept my hands on the steering wheel. I kept my voice normal. I said, "That was nice of her, baby." But I was already understanding. Rachel had packed my daughter's hairbrush into a Ziploc bag with her own hands. Sealed it. Handed it to Margaret. Not because she was swept up in a moment. But because she had planned to. Because she had shown up to that sleepover specifically to collect that sample. Smiling at Sophie the whole time, telling her she had beautiful hair, acting like a loving aunt while she documented my childlike evidence. I thought about all the sleepovers before that one. How normal they had always seemed. How Sophie had come home happy, talking about grandma's cooking or the movie they had watched. And I realized that Margaret had been patient too, in her own way. She had not acted immediately. She had waited until she had Rachel beside her, until they had a plan, until they were certain. The sleepovers had been reconnaissance. The warmth had been cover. Every gift Margaret had ever brought Sophie, every bedtime story, every grandmother moment, all of it had been running alongside a parallel operation that treated my daughter as a means to an end. That realization did not make me cry. It made me very, very still. Because I understood then that what Margaret and Rachel had been doing was not impulsive hatred. It was organized hatred. The kind that requires patience, coordination, and the willingness to look a child in the face and smile while using her to build your case. There is a particular kind of person who is capable of that. And the only correct response to that kind of person is not emotion. It is documentation. I did not confront either of them. I filed that information in the same place I had been filing Margaret's cruelties for 25 years. But this time I told Daniel the same night. And Daniel said 3 words. "Then we prepare." 6 weeks before the dinner, Margaret asked for 3 sleepovers with Sophie in a 4-week window. Before that year, sleepovers were occasional, warmly requested, normal. This was different. This was cover. The first sleepover had produced the sample. The remaining ones were meant to look like a grandmother who simply loved her granddaughter very much. Then came the message that confirmed everything was already in motion. I borrowed Daniel's laptop to print a document. A notification appeared on his screen before I could minimize it. A message from Rachel, sent to the wrong thread, the one she shared with Daniel instead of the private thread she shared with Margaret. It said, "She doesn't know yet. Just wait." 5 words. That was all. But it was enough. I showed Daniel that evening. He read it twice. He set the laptop down on the kitchen counter and stood without speaking for a moment. Then he said, "If she's doing what I think she's doing, we let her." No confrontation. No warning call to Margaret. No dramatic scene. We went quiet. We let the sleepovers happen. We let Rachel exchange messages with Margaret, believing their plan was proceeding undisturbed. We let them interpret our silence as ignorance or fear. And in the background, Daniel went to the basement storage room, moved 3 boxes from the back shelf, and began going through papers he had not opened in years. He worked for 3 hours without stopping. When he came upstairs, he had 4 organized folders and a look on his face I recognized. The same expression he wore before walking into the most important client meetings of his career. I asked him if we had everything we needed. He said we had more than we needed. He said the question was never whether we had proof. The question was whether we were willing to use it the way it would need to be used. In public. In front of people. Without apology and without softening. I told him I had been ready for 25 years. He smiled at that. A real smile, not a tired one. And he said, then we let her book the restaurant. We had approximately 3 weeks between that conversation and the dinner invitation. We used every day. We met with our attorney. We had all 4 folders reviewed and confirmed. We had duplicates made and lodged with his office. We discussed exactly what we would say and in what order. Not because we were performing, but because preparation is what keeps emotion from overwhelming strategy when strategy is what the moment requires. I want to be clear about something before I take you back to that restaurant. At no point during any of this did Daniel ask me to justify myself. At no point did he treat the documentation as something he needed to verify against me. He had made his decision 8 years earlier and he had never once revisited it. What was coming was not about him deciding what to believe. It was about both of us deciding how to end something that should have been ended long before it reached a private dining room at Harrington's. That is what a real partner looks like. I want you to have that on record. I need to tell you what was in those boxes. Because this is the center of everything. 8 years ago, I was alone in our home for 4 days while Daniel was in Houston for a work conference. It was October. A neighborhood I had always considered safe. A security system we had been planning to install but had not yet scheduled. On the 3rd night, someone broke in. I will not linger on the details because they belong to me and I have already given them to police reports and hospital records and 18 months of therapy sessions. What I will tell you is this. I called the police immediately. I went to the hospital that night. I completed every forensic step available to me. I gave a full statement. I filed a complete report. Within 48 hours I had engaged every legal and medical resource my situation required. And I had done so calmly and thoroughly, because the only thing I could control in those days was how completely I documented what had happened. I called Daniel in Houston at 2 in the morning. He was on the first available flight back. We went to a therapist together for the following 18 months. We talked about everything. We made decisions about our future. About what we wanted, about what we could carry and what we needed help carrying. We were not 2 people managing a crisis by agreement. We were 2 people going through something genuine together. There were hard nights in those 18 months. There were mornings where I woke up and had to actively choose to stay in my own life. There were conversations that required more honesty than I knew I was capable of. But Daniel showed up to every one of them. Not with speeches or gestures. Just with presence. Just with consistency. The same man in the same chair every session. Asking the same question at the end of every hard evening, "Are you all right?" And meaning it every single time. I want to say that clearly because it is the foundation of everything else in this story. Margaret built her case on the assumption that Daniel would choose blood over loyalty when the moment arrived. She had spent 8 years believing that. She had invested $3,500 and 25 years of scheming on that belief. She did not know the man she had raised. Daniel wrote me a letter 3 months after the attack. He wrote it by hand on plain paper and gave it to me after dinner on a Tuesday night without ceremony. He said he wanted me to have it in writing so that on any day when I needed it I could read it and know. The letter said many things. The line he would later read aloud in a restaurant said, "I don't care whose DNA she carries. She is our daughter and always will be." In the boxes in that basement were the original police report, time-stamped October 14th. The hospital forensic records, 314 pages, containing every examination, every clinical finding, Every notation made by every professional who saw me in that 48-hour window. The emergency treatment records. The insurance claim filed within 72 hours, complete with adjuster signature and claim number. Our therapist's appointment records. And the letter. Daniel organized these into 4 folders inside a leather document bag. Methodically. Completely. With the quiet focus of a man who understood that the moment coming toward them required preparation, not panic. He set the bag by the front door the morning of the dinner and did not mention it again. Margaret had spent $3,500 and 25 years building toward one night. She had not spent a single moment preparing for the morning after. Margaret had booked a private dining room at Harrington's. Minimum spend per table, $200 per head. Private room deposit, $800. The kind of restaurant that signals a significant occasion simply by its name on the invitation. She made every call herself. Daniel's aunts and uncles. Cousins from 2 different states. Daniel's business partner Thomas and his wife. 3 family friends she had known for decades. She told them all it was a family celebration. She did not tell anyone what they were celebrating. She wanted 30 people. She got 30 people. She wanted an audience large enough that the story would be impossible to contain. She had imagined this dinner. She had rehearsed it. She had thought about the moment she would stand up, the way the room would go quiet, the way Daniel would look at his wife, the way Emily would have nowhere to go and no way to lie, and no option but to collapse in front of everyone Margaret had carefully chosen for exactly this purpose. But I need to tell you something about the weeks before that dinner. Because the overconfidence of someone who believes they have already won is its own particular thing to witness. After Margaret had the DNA results in hand, she became almost unrecognizable in her social behavior. She started hinting to relatives, not directly but with the unmistakable weight of someone who is barely containing something enormous. She told 2 of her closest friends she had discovered something important. She told Daniel's cousin she was about to do something that needed to be done years ago. She was not being discreet. She did not think she needed to be discreet anymore. She thought she had won. Rachel was worse. Rachel had started mentally redistributing assets that were not hers. A mutual acquaintance mentioned to me later that Rachel had talked openly to her own friends about changes coming, framed as though Daniel's business were already something she had an interest in. They were celebrating before the trap had closed. They were already living in the future they had designed. That is a specific kind of dangerous. The confidence of people who have been planning so long they have started to mistake the plan for the outcome. Margaret had held this plan so close and for so long that she had stopped being able to see its edges. She had stopped asking whether it could fail. She had stopped accounting for the possibility that the person she was planning against was not the passive, absorbing woman she had always assumed me to be. She had looked at 25 years of my silence and read it as weakness. She had never once considered that it might be strategy. It is also, as it turned out, exactly the kind of dangerous that makes people sloppy. Rachel arrived at the restaurant before us and sat beside Margaret near the head of the long table. They were composed in that particular way people are composed when they are containing excitement. I noticed Rachel touch Margaret's arm twice before we had even been seated. Small, quick touches, like 2 people in silent coordination reminding each other they are about to win. We arrived at a normal time. I wore a navy wrap dress. Daniel wore the charcoal suit he usually wore for client presentations. He set the document bag under his chair when he sat down and ordered a sparkling water. Margaret noticed the bag. I watched her eyes go to it and then dismiss it. She decided it was a laptop case. She moved on. That was the beginning of her undoing. The most dangerous thing in that room was not the envelope in Margaret's hand. It was the document bag under Daniel's chair, and she had just looked directly at it and seen nothing. Dinner moved through its stages with the unreality of a thing you know is not what it appears to be. Margaret was pleasant in an elevated way, slightly louder than necessary, attentive to people further down the table, generous with the wine. She told a story about a charity event that made 3 people laugh. She asked Daniel's business partner about a recent project with evident warmth. She asked me how Sophie's school year was going and listened to the answer with the appearance of genuine interest. Rachel smiled throughout, ate very little, and checked her phone once with the specific kind of checking that was not casual. I ate my dinner. I answered questions about Sophie's school. I asked Daniel's aunt about her recent trip. I was present and calm because I had had 6 weeks to decide what my face was going to do when the envelope appeared. And I had made a deliberate decision. I was not going to perform anything. Not surprise. Not fear. Not confusion. I was going to sit in my chair and let Daniel lead. And I was going to wait. There is a particular kind of surreal that settles in when you are sitting across from someone who believes they are about to destroy you and you know exactly what is coming and they do not know that you know. I watched Margaret refill someone's wine glass with a gracious tilt of the bottle and I thought, she practiced this too. She rehearsed the warmth before the strike. She made sure everyone was comfortable first, made sure they liked her, made sure they had eaten and laughed and relaxed, so that when the moment arrived it would feel like a revelation from someone trustworthy rather than an attack from someone with a motive. It was, in its way, masterful. And it would have worked on a different night with a different couple sitting at that table. The envelope came out between the main course and dessert. Margaret rose to her feet. The room settled without anyone asking it to. She had spent decades developing the particular authority that fills a space when someone used to being listened to decides it is time to speak. She placed one hand flat on the tablecloth, held the envelope in the other and began. I want to thank everyone for being here. I know some of you came a long way and I genuinely appreciate that. Pause. A small, gracious smile at the room. I've asked you here because I believe that family is built on truth. And I have recently discovered something that I believe this family deserves to know. I watched Thomas, Daniel's business partner of 11 years, go slightly still. He had come expecting a celebration. He was reading the room and realizing this was not that. My son has spent 8 years raising a child who is not his biological daughter, Margaret said. Clear. Precise. Rehearsed. I have proof of this. I want Daniel to have all the information he deserves to have. And I want this family to understand what has been hidden from us. She placed the envelope on the table and stepped back from it, as though presenting evidence that would speak for itself. The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then 30 people processed it simultaneously and the sound that followed was not screaming or shouting. It was the dense, pressured noise of a large group encountering something that does not fit the context. Sharp intakes of breath. The scrape of a fork set down without thought. Someone at the far end of the table said, "Oh my God," in a low voice that carried anyway, because everything carries in silence. Every face in that room turned toward me. Every single face. I looked at Daniel. Daniel had not moved toward the envelope. He was looking at the table directly in front of him, not with confusion, not with devastation, but with the particular stillness of a man who is measuring something, deciding on the precise right moment to begin. Then he raised his head. He looked at his mother. And he said very calmly, "Mom, are you absolutely sure you want to do this here?" Margaret heard something in that question. She heard him wavering. She heard weakness. Her chin came up. "Yes," she said. "I am absolutely sure." Daniel reached under his chair. He placed the first folder on the table without opening it, hands flat on top. And he spoke to the room, not just to Margaret but to everyone. "Before I open anything, I need everyone at this table to hear something clearly. I have known about Sophie's biology since before she was born. My wife told me everything. We went through everything together. We made every decision about our family together. There has never been a secret between Emily and me about this child. Not for one single day." The restaurant ventilation was audible. That is how quiet the room was. "What my wife went through," Daniel continued, "is something she had no control over and something she handled with more strength and more dignity than most people will ever be asked to demonstrate. And I am going to explain it to all of you now because my mother has decided that a room full of 30 people is the appropriate place to make accusations about a trauma she has never once asked my wife about. Margaret said, Daniel. He opened the folder. This is a police report. Filed October 14th, 8 years ago in our county precinct. It documents a home invasion at our residence on a night I was traveling for work. My wife was assaulted in our home. He passed it to his right. Daniel's uncle Gerald, a man who had practiced real estate law for 30 years and had a particular quality of stillness I had always associated with people who have read a great deal of very serious paperwork, took the folder, opened it, and read the first page. His expression shifted in the specific way that happens when someone who knows how to read official documents understands exactly what they are looking at. He passed it without being asked. It went around the table. As it moved, I watched faces change. This, Daniel said, setting down the second folder, is the hospital forensic report. 314 pages. Every examination. Every clinical finding. Every timestamp. All of it consistent with the police report. All of it filed the same night. The stack landed with weight. This is the insurance claim. Filed within 72 hours of the break-in. Claim number, date of filing, adjuster's signature, settlement record. All of it. He looked up at his mother. And this is a letter I wrote to my wife approximately 3 months after the attack. I wrote it by hand because I wanted her to have something she could hold. I am going to read one line from it, and then I am going to tell you what I think of what happened here tonight. He unfolded the letter with both hands. I had read that letter more times than I can count. On good days and on the days I needed it most. But I had never heard it spoken aloud in a room full of people. That was a different thing entirely. I was not prepared for that. Daniel, read. I don't care whose DNA she carries. She is our daughter and always will be. He folded the letter and set it on the table. 3 people were crying. Not demonstratively. The quiet kind. Daniel's aunt had her hand pressed to her mouth. Thomas's wife had turned slightly away from the table. A cousin I had known for 20 years was blinking hard at his water glass. I chose Emily, Daniel said. I chose Sophie. I made that decision with full information and I have never once regretted it. My mother spent $3,500 to prove something I already knew. She used our daughter's hairbrush. From a sleepover she arranged specifically to collect that sample. She organized this dinner so that 30 people would be watching when she did it. He looked at his mother steadily. You didn't uncover a secret. You exposed a trauma. You took the worst thing that ever happened to my wife and tried to turn it into a weapon against her. In front of our family. In front of our friends. In front of our business associates. With a smile on your face. Margaret's voice came out smaller than she intended. I was trying to protect you. You deserved to know the truth. I knew the truth, Daniel said. You knew I knew. Rachel knew I knew. This was never about protecting me. He looked at me. Just my name. Just, Emily. That was the signal. I reached into my bag and placed my own folder on the table. These are screenshots, I said. Text messages between Margaret and Rachel over the past 14 months. They are time-stamped. They are original. They have been duplicated and are currently held by our attorney. I had chosen 4 messages to read aloud. Not the most emotionally extreme ones. The clearest ones. The ones that left no room for interpretation. The first. Margaret to Rachel 11 months before the dinner. Once I get the results, Emily is finished. Daniel will finally see what she really is and everything changes. The second. Rachel to Margaret the day after a Sophie sleepover. Got what you needed. The sample is at the courier. Lab will have it by Thursday. Rachel's chair moved. Not a full rise. A reflex. The cousin to her left put a hand on the back of her chair without looking at her. The third. Margaret to Rachel 6 months before the dinner. Book the restaurant for the end of the month. I want family there. I want Thomas and Caroline. I want Gerald. I want everyone watching when she has nowhere to go. The fourth, and the one I watched land in the room like a physical object, was this. That little girl is not a real Carter and never has been. When this comes out, Emily loses the house, the accounts, all of it. It should have been Rachel's from the start. It still can be. The silence after that fourth message was different from any silence that had come before it. Because that message did not just expose cruelty. It exposed motive. It showed 30 people, many of whom had known Margaret for decades, that this had never been about Daniel's well-being. It had been about money. It had always been about money. And it had been about using a child, using a trauma, using a family's most private wound, as the instrument to move that money from one place to another. I set the folder down. I did not say anything further. I did not need to. The messages said what needed to be said, in Margaret's own words, time-stamped, unambiguous, and now visible to every person at that table. Thomas spoke first. He had known Margaret for 11 years. Attended the same industry dinners. She had sent flowers when his father died. His voice was level in the way voices go level when someone is working very hard to stay controlled. You organized this because of the estate, he said. That is what this entire thing is. Margaret said, that is not. The message says it, Thomas said. In your own words. The house. The accounts. You wanted it redirected to Rachel. He looked at her and I watched 11 years of professional warmth leave his face completely. I flew here from Baltimore. You told me it was a celebration. What followed was not a scene. There was no screaming. No throwing of things. No ultimatums delivered with theatrical weight. It was more devastating than any of that. It was the quiet dismantling of a person standing in a room full of people who had admired her. Margaret attempted to reframe. She said she had a right to protect her son. That she was his mother and that entitled her to certain things. That regardless of the circumstances, Daniel deserved to make an informed decision about his family. Daniel's aunt looked at her directly and said, He told you he already knew, Margaret. He wrote her a letter. What exactly were you trying to save him from? Margaret had no answer. Thomas asked whether Margaret understood that in our state, collecting someone's genetic material without their consent was a criminal offense. Margaret said she had not been aware of that. Thomas said her attorney would inform her. Then Margaret said the words that sealed everything. She said she was sorry for the method, but not for the intention. She said Daniel had a right to know what kind of woman he had married. Daniel, who had been composed through the entire evening with a focus I will always be in awe of, looked at his mother when she said those words and said very quietly, the kind of woman who was assaulted in her own home and still called the police, cooperated with every examination, told her husband the complete truth within hours, and spent the next 8 years building a life. That is the kind of woman I married. And you used her worst night to try to bankrupt her in front of 30 people. So I'm going to need you to never finish that sentence again. The room, which had already been silent, became something beyond silence. Gerald, who had been a quiet and dignified presence through every family gathering for as long as I had been in this family, pushed back his chair, stood and said something once without raising his voice. You tried to use a child as a tool to take money from her mother. That is what you did tonight. In front of all of us. In front of people who will remember this for the rest of their lives. Patricia, Margaret's friend of 20 years, picked up her purse. She walked around the long table, stopped at my chair and said to me, I am so sorry this happened to you. Then she left. 2 more couples followed within minutes. Rachel attempted to stand. She got halfway to her feet. 3 people moved simultaneously without coordination. Thomas stepped to one side. A cousin blocked the other route. Anne Carroll, a family friend Margaret had personally called to invite, someone who had known her for 22 years and driven 90 minutes to this dinner, simply said, Sit down, Rachel. You're not going anywhere yet. Rachel sat down. Margaret, who had maintained her posture through the police report and the forensic records and Daniel's letter and my screenshots, finally sat. Not by choice. Her body made the decision before she did. Daniel's aunt came around the table and held my face in both her hands. When she spoke, she said she was sorry, not as a general condolence but as a specific statement. As though she were apologizing for years of things she had witnessed and had not fully intervened in. The cousin from out of state looked at Margaret on his way past and said quietly, "I won't be at Christmas this year. Or next year." A woman named Carol, the one who had told Rachel to sit down, stopped beside me before she left. She had driven 90 minutes to be at this dinner. Margaret had called her personally, described it as a celebration, said it was important that the people who mattered most to the family be present. Carol looked at me and said, "She called me 3 times to make sure I was coming. I want you to know I understand now why she needed witnesses. And I want you to know I will be one for the right side." Douglas, an older relative who had sat quietly through the entire evening, put on his coat slowly and stopped at Margaret's end of the table on his way out. He had known her for 40 years. He had been at their wedding. He had watched her raise Daniel. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking, in the way that people look at something they are seeing clearly for the first time after a long period of not wanting to. Then he said only, "I've known you for 40 years, Margaret. I don't know who this is." And he left without waiting for an answer. By the time the room had emptied, the only people left were Daniel, me, Margaret, Rachel, and Gerald. Daniel looked at his mother. Not with anger. With the expression of a man who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and has finally been given permission to put it down. "I defended you to Emily for 25 years, he said. "Every insult. Every comment. Every Christmas where you found something to make her feel less than welcome in her own family. I told her you were difficult but that you loved us. I told her to have patience. I told her it would get better." He paused. "Tonight you used our daughter's trauma as a weapon in front of 30 people. You used Sophie, a 9-year-old girl who does not know any of this and who calls you grandma. You used her to try to take money from her mother. And you did it with a smile." He picked up the document bag. "I don't hate you. But I am never going to speak to you again. I need you to hear that as a final statement, not as a threat. This is the last conversation we will ever have. Goodbye, Mom." He took my hand. We walked out of the private dining room, through the restaurant and into the parking lot. The November air was cold. We stood at the car for a moment before either of us moved to get in. Daniel said, "Are you all right?" I said I was. I meant it. The morning after the dinner, Daniel called our attorney at 8:15. By the following Tuesday, a formal 6-page letter had been delivered to Margaret's residence. It documented 3 specific violations: the unauthorized collection of Sophie Carter's genetic material during a supervised family visit, the engagement of a private laboratory for testing without parental consent, and the documented coordinated intent to cause material and reputational damage to Emily Carter. 3 state statutes were cited. The letter was not a warning. It was a notice of record. Any distribution of the test results in any form to any party for any purpose would result in immediate legal proceedings. Margaret's attorney called ours the following day. Our attorney said, "Your client should understand that we have 30 witnesses, 14 months of documented messages, time-stamped police and hospital records, and a signed letter from her son. Our clients have no interest in a settlement. They are interested only in compliance." Contact ceased. I want to be honest about something. I did not feel the satisfaction I expected to feel when I heard about Rachel's divorce and the forced sale of her house. I felt something quieter than that. A kind of tired recognition. Rachel had made choices. She had made them consistently, deliberately over years. She had helped her mother collect my daughter's genetic material from a hairbrush. Whatever consequences arrived, she had built the road to them herself. I do not celebrate it. Celebrating would mean it still carries energy in my life. It does not. Rachel's situation unraveled from a different direction. Her husband, who had not been at the dinner, heard about everything within 24 hours. He asked Rachel about the messages directly. Rachel said she had only been trying to support her mother, that she hadn't understood how far Margaret intended to go. He asked to see her phone. Rachel said no. He filed for separation 9 days later. During the financial disclosure phase of the divorce, a home equity line of credit Rachel had co-signed with Margaret became visible, used to fund the DNA testing, legal consultations, and other expenditures connected to their shared operation. The total obligation was $95,000. Rachel could not service that debt on her own income. The house went to forced sale. And by the 3-month mark, Rachel was no longer speaking to Margaret. Rachel blamed Margaret for the plan. Margaret blamed Rachel for the execution. The alliance that had held for years on the shared dream of Emily's destruction collapsed completely the moment the dream did. 60 days after the dinner, Daniel revised our estate planning. Both Margaret and Rachel received formal written notification. The family home, the retirement accounts, the business equity, the savings, all future assets. Approximately $4.7 million in assets they had organized a dinner to redirect toward themselves. They received zero. They left that dinner with nothing they came with, in front of 30 people who now understood exactly what they had attempted to do. I want to stop here for a moment and say something directly, because if you have watched this far, it is probably because some part of this story is familiar. Maybe you are not dealing with a DNA test or an inheritance. Maybe the scale is different. But if you are the person in your family who absorbs the years of small cruelties because you believe in keeping the peace, if you are the person treated as the problem by the very people you have sacrificed the most for, I want you to hear this clearly. Your patience is not weakness. Your patience is the thing that gives you time to know what you are actually dealing with. It is the thing that gives you time to prepare. And preparation is what makes the difference between a moment of temporary satisfaction and a consequence that lasts. The people who underestimate you are doing so because the version of you they have seen is the version you chose to show them. They have never seen what you are capable of when you decide enough is enough. If you believe real justice is earned through preparation and executed with precision, drop a comment and subscribe. Because this channel exists for exactly this kind of story. 1 year after the dinner at Harrington's, This Is Our Life. Sophie is 9 years old. She is in the gifted program at her school. She has become obsessed with marine biology and keeps a running list of ocean species she wants to study before she turns 20. She goes to bed every night in a house where both of her parents are present and steady and where nothing is owed and nothing is withheld. She does not know about the restaurant dinner. She does not know about the DNA test. She does not know about any of it. She knows Daniel as her father, which he is, in the only definition of that word that has ever mattered. James is 12. He is building a website for his school science project and he asked Daniel to look over his code last Tuesday evening. They sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours going through it together. James has Daniel's particular quality of sustained focus. He can work on one problem for a very long time without losing interest. I watch them together and I think about the version of our family Margaret was trying to build. The one with the money redirected and the marriage dissolved and the children redistributed along biological lines. And I understand at a cellular level how badly she had misread everything. This is what she was trying to destroy. 2 children and their father at a kitchen table on a Tuesday night. That is what she organized a restaurant dinner around eliminating. Daniel's firm continued to grow. He took on 2 major new contracts in the 18 months following the dinner and expanded the team to 11 people. The business valuation crossed $3 million. We purchased a beachfront property 4 hours from home, paid $1.4 million for it and were there for 3 weeks in the summer. And Sophie spent the first morning standing at the edge of the water listing every animal that might be living in it. I finally have the quiet I spent 25 years trying to earn. No phone calls from Margaret on holidays with something small embedded in the warmth. No Rachel at gatherings watching me over the rim of a glass with that measuring look. No performing my right to be in my own family for an audience that had already made its decision. Our home is genuinely ours. Our time is genuinely ours. Our Sunday mornings are ours. Our arguments are ours. Our decisions, every single one without consultation or interference or the quiet pressure of someone else's expectations, are ours. I did not know until the pressure was gone how much energy I had been spending simply managing it. How much of myself I had given to maintaining a version of peace that was never real peace, that required constant performance, constant vigilance. What I have now is not a managed version of something. It is the actual thing. That sounds simple. It is not simple. It is the thing I did not know how much I needed until I had it. And Margaret. She lives alone. Daniel does not call. Most of the cousins who sat in that private dining room at Harrington's have largely withdrawn. 2 stopped contact entirely. The ones who maintained any contact did so at arm's length and with a quality of distance that had not been there before. She attempted to reach us twice through intermediaries. Both times Daniel responded through our attorney. 1 paragraph each time. Citing the dinner. Citing the evidence. Requesting that all contact attempts cease. They ceased. I do not think about Margaret often. That is the honest answer. She occupied so much space in my life for so long that the absence of her is itself something I sometimes notice. The way you notice when a noise you had stopped hearing was actually there the whole time. And then the noticing passes and I do not think about her again. She is 59 years old. She has decades ahead of her. She is financially stable and she lives in a beautiful home. And she will spend those decades in the specific silence of someone who cleared the room herself. Who chose the audience, who planned the night, who watched it become the thing that ended every relationship she had tried to protect. I have thought occasionally about whether she understands what she actually did wrong. Not the legal piece. Not the strategy or execution or choice of venue. The fundamental thing. Whether she can see that she spent 25 years pointing at the wrong problem and missed the actual one entirely. The problem was never me. The problem was never Sophie's biology. The problem was not even really the money, though money was the mechanism. The problem was that Margaret could not tolerate loving a son she could not control. She could not hold space for a family that made its own decisions and built its own shape and did not require her approval to exist. She had raised a man capable of extraordinary loyalty and then spent decades unable to forgive him for giving that loyalty to someone she had not selected. And so she spent 25 years trying to undo a choice that was not hers to undo. And the only thing she managed to undo was herself. She believed family was built on bloodlines. She organized 30 witnesses to prove it. What she proved instead, in front of every person she had chosen, was that the woman she had spent 25 years trying to destroy was the only reason that family was worth having in the first place. The DNA test showed exactly what she paid to see. Sophie is not Daniel's biological daughter. And Margaret lost her son, his wife, his children, his network, his estate, and every single person in that restaurant anyway. Because biology is just data. What Daniel and I built together. What Sophie was born into and is growing up inside of, what we protected and chose and kept choosing across 25 years of sustained hostility, is not data. It is a family. And Margaret, for all her planning and her private dining rooms and her $3,500 lab results, never once understood what that word actually means. She thought she was going to take something from me that night. Instead, she gave me the only thing I had ever wanted. The proof in front of 30 witnesses that she never had the power she thought she did. And Sophie, who knows nothing of restaurants or DNA tests or documents passed around dinner tables, woke up the morning after that dinner and asked if we could go to the beach. She wanted to look for hermit crabs. She had read that they carry their homes on their backs, that they move from shell to shell as they grow, always finding something that fits them better. I told her we could go that weekend. I meant it. Some things you build slowly, carefully, across years of choosing the same person every day. And when someone tries to take it from you, All they really show you is how solid it became when you weren't watching.